So today's coffee break is a training, as you know, so it's a little bit different. We are going to allow a lot of ample time for questions at the end. Those questions, again, you can type those into the chat box on Zoom as we go along, and we'll be watching those, monitoring those, and then answer them at the end during the questions section. And today, as I said, my name is Zoe, and I also wanted to introduce Megan, our wildlife biologist, who will be doing, she's waving, a lot of the presentation. As well, she's very experienced with our wildlife cameras and species identification, and she has been through all of our photos, which is quite a feat, as you'll hear later on. So today, today's agenda, first we're going to talk a little bit about the border wildlife study. Then we'll go into the Zooniverse platform. That will be the bulk of the presentation, talking about the platform and some of the features it has. And then we'll do a live walkthrough on the website, which should be really helpful for everyone who plans on volunteering on this project. Then we'll go through some pro tips from Megan and how to look and analyze photos, how to spot wildlife, which, as she'll tell us, can be extremely difficult, but she's going to give us some great tips. And then we'll have that time for questions for those of you that have started using the Zooniverse platform, or those of you who haven't and just have some questions. So to get started, our border wildlife study, for those of you who missed us last week and our big 90-day update, the border wildlife study has been a priority project for us this year in 2020. The study aims to document the incredible diversity of wildlife species that are under threat now from Trump administration's active border wall construction between southern Arizona and northern Mexico. So our study area is along the southern Arizona-Mexico border between the Patagonia Mountains to the west over here, and then the Huachuca Mountains over here to the east. So this is, as you'll see here in the orange area, this is where border wall new construction has been planned. And so our study focuses on this area. We've set out 48 wildlife cameras in early March of this year in southern Arizona, and then we were able to put out 8 about a month later in Sonora in northern Mexico. So over here on the right side of the screen, you'll see these camera blocks. So 11, 12, 13, 14, and 16 on the US side. And then you'll see and 15, sorry, and then our block number 16 in Sonora. So each one of these camera blocks has 8 wildlife cameras that take photos of wildlife 24/7. So you can check out the more results from the first 90 days of the border wildlife study on our website, which we're pasting the link into the chat box there. But with this extensive camera array in such a magical wildlife-filled area, you can probably imagine we have a lot of wildlife photos. And actually not just a lot, we have 1.6 million photos that we've taken in the study so far, which is about, it's been about 4 months or so. So of these 1.6 million photos, there's a lot of work that goes into it. So first, I just wanted to say we've identified 71 unique species on our cameras, and we're still detecting additional species with every camera check. So when we go out to the field and take out the SD cards and see what photos were captured on each camera. And as we mentioned last time in the 90-day report, our species accumulation curve is not flattening out yet, meaning that indicates to us there's more species to detect in the area. So as I said, it's a lot of work and we need your help. Megan does a lot of work separating the photos from those that are empty because of false triggers such as hot moving grass or people or other things, separating those from photos that actually do detect an animal. And then she works to identify the species. So we need your help to confirm and verify some of these species identifications. So this is where you come in. Zooniverse is an online platform that hosts citizen science projects from all around the world. They have a lot of really interesting projects and photos that I'd recommend checking out. You can see photos from the Serengeti, from all over. So it's really great to get involved and see what's out there. We at Sky Island, we've created 2 projects. So we have a project featuring all of our mammal photos and then a project featuring all of our bird photos. And we've gotten a lot more bird photos than we expected, which is really exciting. And part of why we were driven to do this work and get help from all of you, and especially those expert birders. So the two projects are pretty similar. And Megan, like I said, is going to walk us through in detail on the online platform. But just to give you a little preview, you basically log on to the site using the links which you can find on our website. You can read about the project, more of the history of the science behind the study and all of that. And then you help to identify species. So there's a few features I'm going to highlight as you go along, including a tutorial, field guide, and talk message boards that will help you. So the first one, the tutorial. So when you log on, kind of in this right side column is tutorial, and it should pop up when it's your first time logging on. And you'll move through this, and it will basically give you a short tutorial of how to do the classification. We really encourage reading it because there's a lot of helpful information in there, and it will save a lot of time and frustration if you read that ahead of time before moving on to the species identification. We also have a short field guide in each of the projects, in the mammals project and the bird project, that can help with the species ID. So this is not extensive, but we basically tried to put some information about species that are often confused. So yeah, so you can access that from the field guide, include some photos actually from our cameras of species of those that we have identified, so you can kind of get an idea of what they look like there, and then some written information as well. And finally, the talk message board. So on Zooniverse, this is a really, really helpful feature. It really brings the community citizen science to life because it's an opportunity to interact with the staff here at Sky Island and then other volunteer Zooniversers as well. So we have a general discussion here where you can leave any comments or feedback on the images, point out what you see. But I really wanted to highlight there's another talk board of species not on list, and that's for where we're going to compile all of the new species IDs that you do for species that aren't on our classification list because we haven't yet seen them in the study. So again, this will be really helpful and important for some of our bird experts who are able to identify the birds down to the species level, whereas we might not have been able to do that. So this talk board is really great. There's also a third one which will have announcements from our team as things get updated. So I definitely recommend checking out this talk board every time you log in. So that's a basic overview. We'll now have a live walkthrough with our mammal project with Megan.
Hello everyone, I'm Megan Bethel, a wildlife specialist. And right now we're just going to go over a brief overview of going through this project like Zoe just talked about live. So this is the home page for the border mammal study. The birds looks basically the same. And get yourself familiar with the home page. It has some cool little features about what people are talking about, various IDs they might be suggesting. And as you scroll down, there's a few statistics which can help you get a sense of who's working on this project and just the scale of it. So like right now for this border project, we have 16 volunteers helping to ID who've gone through 1,800 photos already though. And there's 4,000 photos to go through. They're called subjects here on Zooniverse. And the completed subjects means like 5 people have offered an identification, and that's usually like enough to get a pretty good clarification on an ID. So that's why it's still at 0. So probably 5 people haven't seen all the photos. And then we have a few more about the about section about the study. If you want to read more, you can click this and you can learn all about the border and Sky Island and our work there. So then the big thing to do is just click get started, and that'll open up some photos for you. And like Zoe was showing, this is basically your big workstation. There's the photo and then a list of options of all the species that we've seen so far on the list on the left or on the right. We don't have all the species in southern Arizona. We only have the ones that have been detected. So if there's something new, that'll be really exciting, we'll add it. But some cool features just to be aware of when looking at photos is the zoom function. Sometimes a photo isn't as nice as this deer. You'll have to zoom around and look for any little things that might be hiding in the corners. There's a zoom out and then this pan function. We can kind of scroll. But this guy, he's nice and big. So zoom out. Another cool feature that Zooniverse has is an invert function at the bottom right here, this little black and white moon kind of thing. And that'll flip the image. And so say if the image is really dark, or if you can't quite make out an animal in the scene, I really recommend inverting the image, and that makes, this helps you get a new view and makes animals stand out a little better. So this guy, you kind of have to, or a good thing to start with if you're not familiar with the species of the region is to check out the field guide. Like this guy, you can kind of, it's pretty obvious he's a deer because of the antlers and just the body type. And so we have field guides for the mammals that are often confused, like the 2 deer species, the mule deer and the whitetail. And there's some photos of both the male and the female, as well as some descriptors. You have smaller ears, a white tail, and there's also a few links if you want to read more. But also, if you have a pretty confident ID, like this is probably a white-tailed deer, you can also click on that species, and that'll pop up a little, a couple photos, other photo examples of the same guy actually, as well as a short description, like larger body, fluffy underside tail, male antlers do not branch. And for some of these animals like deer and skunks, they can often be confused with other species. There's an option right here, like often confused with mule deer, and that'll bring up some photos you can go through and compare to see if this could be actually a mule deer. But looking at the antlers, they're a little bit smaller and they have one main beam with little tines coming off, rather than a mule deer who has bigger antlers that fork. So I'm going to say dismiss. I think this is probably a white-tailed deer. And also you can see his fluffy little white tail. But we also want to know, besides just the ID, some behavioral stuff, as well as how many there are. So we just say there's one individual. A couple behavior stuff, he's just standing there. So just click the right behavior. I don't see any young. If you see youngsters, that's really cool. We want to make sure we document that in the border region. But in this case, there's nothing. There's no other species in the image, but often there are multiple species. So keep an eye out if you see like an insect or a bird in the background or squirrels. You also want to know that. And then for the deer, we want to know if they're antlers or not, just to see if they're male or female. And this one, yes, he has antlers. And then you click identify, and then done to confirm. And then it moves you on to the next photo. And then you just keep doing the same process over and over again. For like this case, these are 2 more white-tailed deer because of their fluffy tails and their smaller ears. But there's 2 this time. They're just kind of walking. This behavior stuff doesn't have to be like super accurate, just a general thing of what they're doing. There's probably no young. There's other species, and there's no antlers. They're probably females. Identify and then done. And then you just keep going on and on. It's kind of addictive once you start IDing animals. And a lot of our photos are going to be deer. They're the most common species on our camera. So if you're not familiar with these deer, I'm sure you will be after going through a couple of our photos. And that's where I recommend looking at the field guide again, especially for the skunks, which are often confused and can look very similar on cameras. So I recommend checking out the field guide and reading more about that, as well as the procyonids, which are the really cool mammals that have striped tails, like the ringtail, raccoon, and of course the coati. And so I'm just gonna walk through the species not on list in the talk function. So let's say we'll pretend this deer isn't a white-tailed deer, it's some brand new species. Of course it's not, it's a white-tail. But if you think it's something else, you can click species not on list. And that will open up the same kind of behavioral tabs because we want to know what they're doing as well, just in case, just to know. Walking, multi-species identify. But instead of clicking done, you click done and talk. With that, that'll open up the talk feature where you can, well, I have to be signed in you have an account to make a comment, but if you're signed in and have an account, you can comment and see, or comment what species you think it is. And then you'll be able to tag species not on list. I'm on an incognito thing, so make sure just to allow you to see everything. But once you enter that comment in, it'll go to our talk page where it'll pop up, and Zoe and I will be able to see it and comment on it, and if it's correct, we'll add it to, if it is a new species, we'll add it to our list, and it'll increase the biodiversity, which is really cool. And so that's basically it for the mammals. And just to go back, you go back to classify, and it takes you back to the same page. And I went through the border mammals because I'm a little more confident on the IDs, but the bird project is exactly the same. Same setup, but just with a larger species list. And hopefully you guys will be able to use the species not on list a lot more. We could have included all 100 or a couple hundred native bird species, but that would have been unmanageable. So we started with the ones on our cameras, and hopefully we can build this list out and make it more robust as you guys help. And one thing to know about the birds is that these cameras are not often made to photograph birds, so the photos probably won't be as nice as the mammals, but here you can see there's a hawk in the background, and they just do the exact same process of selecting it and done. So that's basically it for the walkthrough. The big thing I would suggest is, as Zoe said, is to read the tutorial. It'll go over everything we just said, as well as give a few tips, and has some more information that is really good. And then just to go over the field guide for the birds, we have a few other often confused birds, like birds of prey and quail. So I recommend checking that out as well. So I'm going to transition into just sharing a few tips and tricks on how to actually find the animals in the photos. That's always a challenge before you can even ID something. So the first step in any photo identification process is actually finding the animal. Our cameras are set up to not take as high quality of photos in order to have thousands of photos on an SD card and so we can leave them out for longer. So it kind of sacrifices some of the quality. So I'll give a few tips and tricks on how to help you guys find the animals. Like in this case, there's 2 deer in the upper right. So the first thing that's really important is know your scale, the scale of the animal in the photograph. Our cameras are placed all over the borderlands, up in trees, on agave and rocks in the canyons. So often the camera doesn't have the same view for each photo. So like for this case, on the top, these are both bobcats. The top is closer to the ground. So any animals that'll walk by will appear bigger just because they're closer to the camera. Compared to a camera that's up on a hill slope on a tree, the same bobcat looks a lot smaller just because of the scale. So a helpful tip is to look at the vegetation. There's trees nearby or like grass. Look at those in comparison to the animal. And once you know how big a bobcat is in that photo, that'll help you going forward, excuse me, to all the other species. And this is a word of note for these bigger wide shots. Seeing a smaller animal like a mouse will be like almost impossible. So don't beat yourself up too much about that. So here's some examples just of different views the cameras can have. Say on the left, these are both white-tailed deer, but just because of the big sweeping landscape, the same species looks a lot smaller. We need to kind of look in the background just to make sure there's nothing wandering around back there. Compared to the coyote photo on the right, it's the same camera, but the difference isn't too big. A really big thing to look for is to check all the corners. If you think a photo is blank, just check again. Often the animal is running by too quickly for the camera to snap, or it's just meandering by and just doesn't happen to walk fully on the screen. So if you see both these animals on the far right of the screen, there's a mule deer who is sprinting by, and that's all you can get was his little hind feet. And then this coyote that kind of came on screen, but kind of didn't, but you can still kind of tell it was a fluffy body. Just look for noses, tails, ears, especially for birds. You might see a little tip of a tail hanging over, or wings. Birds love to perch on these cameras, especially out in the grasslands, so you'll see a lot of tail feathers if you go through that project. A big thing is to look in the background. This border camera study is unique for Scott Island because we were able to have cameras out in open grasslands of the San Rafael, which is really cool. But that means we have to look a lot farther afield to actually see if there's an animal there. So just take your time, look for differences in the landscape. In this case, there are 3 pronghorn. I don't know if you can see that, walking through the grass. But just take your time, have fun, enjoy the landscape. You might see something. The big thing is the night photos. In Zooniverse, it has the really cool function of being able to invert the image, so I recommend trying that as well. But if you still can't see something, increase the screen brightness. That can often reveal animals that are hidden in the background where the flash couldn't quite reach. So in this case, there's a mountain lion walking by the camera, and it was pretty hidden until you increase the brightness and you could see him walking by. So that's a really cool animal that was hiding in the shadows we didn't want to miss. Oh, sorry. And so my best advice is to just give it your best shot. This takes practice. I've had like 6 or 7 years of going through wildlife cameras, so I've been able to train my eye. And I'm sure once you guys go through a couple hundred photos, or even a couple, like 10, you'll have your eyes trained. And there are photos that even stump me. Like these are a couple kind of blurs. There might be insects, but it's also kind of hard to tell. So just have fun. Enjoy seeing the borderlands and the biodiversity of this amazing region, and hopefully you can see some really cool wildlife. So.
Okay, great. Thank you, Megan. So we're getting a few questions coming in on the chat. That is most of the content we wanted to cover, and now we wanted to share some time, have some time for people who do have questions because they've already been on the platform or just based on what you've seen today. There are also, we did paste that link if you scroll up in the chat to the Zooniverse project links on our website, where you could go into the mammal or the bird study right now if you're interested, if you want to play around yourself and then ask some questions. So yeah, I guess we'll get started. So we're wondering if you did get started, what's going well, what isn't, what are you having trouble with, and how can we help? So I want to start, Megan, I'm gonna summarize some of the questions here. So first I'll just say there's some questions about when the users aren't able to ID an animal. So I'm thinking if we could go over when you're not able to do the species ID or when you can't find the animal. Megan shared some tips for finding the animal, but it's true, sometimes you might not be able to.
I'll go back to the bird study. I'm just going to ID this one real fast because a lot of these bird photos are pretty tricky. I think this one's probably right too. But let's say for this one, it's a little bit more of an open view. There's a bird, but perhaps in this case there isn't a bird. There is a appears blank option. Just in case you try for 5 or 10 minutes and you just really can't see something. All these photos I have gone through, but sometimes just the nature of looking at cameras, it's hard to tell if you don't have the right screen or if you can't compare. So it's okay if you have to click appears blank and then you just would submit that. But if you think you see a bird, but you can't tell what species it is, or it's a blur, or it's just a big tail feather, if you have an unidentifiable option, that's okay to do. Sometimes there are a lot of bird photos where it's just a wing, and unless you're really good, I don't expect you guys to be able to know what species. So it'll have the same behavior questions. If it's flying by, if it's a blurry flyby, we would like to know that too. I think that's...
Thank you. We have another question. Is it worthwhile to ID a skunk, for example, if you can't tell which species? You can't ID to the species level.
Yeah, I think give it your best guess. That's why we have multiple people go through these photos. If 5 people say it's a striped skunk and you get a lucky guess, that's okay. If 3 of the 5 say it's the correct species, we'll probably go with the majority. So it's also a way to help train your ID. So just give it your best guess. If you have to go to Google or don't worry about it. We'd rather know what species it is rather than having you skip the photo, even if it's wrong. So.
Perfect. Yeah, we definitely want to highlight that whether you're a bird expert or an amateur, your classification will help. That's how Zooniverse is set up for multiple people to review every photo. So don't feel bad if it is a little bit of a guess. Okay, we have another question, Megan, about do we need a password to begin, or does the system set us up the first time we sign in?
I think you can definitely do this without signing in, but as I just learned on this call, we can't add comments to the top function, but it's a free site. I recommend making an account, and that'll also give you access to some cool features like saving your favorite photos, as well as being able to participate in the talk. And then if you save your password, it'll auto log in and remember your place in the project, which is also really helpful.
Perfect. Yeah. So we definitely recommend it. We have another question about our cameras. So do they take bursts of pictures or single shots? Just interested because the person asking the question has worked with other projects where cameras do take single shots.
This study has only one shot because we were having, when we first started, we had it in groups of 3 and we were getting thousands and thousands and thousands of grass photos. So in order to save the battery life of the camera and to not have Zoe go out every single day to check the cameras, we changed it to 1, which is a limitation, but that means we can have our cameras out for longer and take more photos in the long run. So there might be a few older photos in here that have burst, but we've transitioned that methodology.
Perfect. We have another question. So again, back to if it's an unidentifiable species, if you were unable to ID on a photo and indicate that, will it still move on to the next photo, or what will happen next?
Yeah, we'll just keep going on to this photo I have right here. We'll just say, we'll pretend it appears blank. We'll just put done, and then it'll move on. So here's a really good one. I think there might be a bird on one of these wires, but unless you kind of have to go scan through. But you say appears blank, you can identify it and confirm it, and then you can just move on. So it's no big deal.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, so we have a question. So it seems like for a couple of these cameras have a lot of blanks, but I'm afraid I'm missing something. So is there a way to cycle through a particular camera's photos to look for differences, like one of those spot the differences kids games?
That's the one limitation of Zooniverse. You can't toggle through the same camera's photos, at least the way we have it set up right now. There might be an option to do that in the future, but that's a great way to look for those tiny little dots. That's how I do it on the work computer. But in this case, we want to focus on IDs and not have to worry about sorting it. So we've allowed the appears blank. It's probably not, but it's okay to admit that.
Yeah, so as Megan mentioned, so, I said we had 1.6 million photos. A lot of those were blank or empty, but Megan has already done the work to separate those from photos that do indeed have animals. So all of the photos that are up on Zooniverse should have an animal. But as we're seeing, they can be really hard to spot. So you can always do the appears blank, or if you think you see something, you can do a guess, because multiple people will see that photo.
And I have to say the bird project is a little bit harder than the mammal project. So maybe you're not a mammal expert, but you want to get familiar with looking for animals. I recommend starting with that. But it's the nature of wildlife cameras. They're not always going to take the National Geographic worthy photo.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so let's, I'm just reviewing these questions. Again, we do have some time left, so if you do have more questions, feel free to put them in here or to go on to Zooniverse and actually get set up. And then if you have any questions, we'll stay on.
We have a question that came in. What are the smallest animals the camera can get? We've seen insects and little flies and native bees fly by. We don't have a project set up for them just yet because they're often just blurs. But we do get hummingbirds on camera, which is really cool as they fly by. And then for mammals, there's one camera that's set up on an old log, and we can see different species of mice and pack rat species. So if you are a rodent expert, you know your small mammals, definitely check out the Mammal project, because that'd be really cool to get at least closer to a family or genus about those little guys.
Perfect. All right, we have another question about what are those small numbers below the pictures? So they might be referring to the metadata.
So.
Oh, okay.
That's just how many individuals there are. That's a good thing for us to add individuals. So it's just sometimes there's like troops of coati or deer that will have more than just one. We'd like to document that.
Great. And I thought, yeah, that probably makes more sense. But if they're referring to there's a little eye information under the main photo. And so sometimes you might see some metadata in there.
Yeah,
which is just
our personal use.
Yes. So we have a question, how many observers do you have on the Mammal project or participants so far?
You can go back, you can see that on the home page. Looks like right now we have 16 volunteers. And I think that counts like registered users. So I've been on here as a incognito person that hasn't been registered me. So. And then the bird project, we can go back and look at that. We have 21 volunteers. So it is kind of neat. You can see how many other people are helping out.
Great. Yeah, and you'll see the project completeness, you also see on that bar down there, and it will start to see that creep up as we get more and more volunteers. We're still at, it still shows 0% because no photos have been retired yet, meaning enough people have ID'd them. So we'll start to see that creep up, and it will be a great way to monitor progress. And then we'll continue to add photos as we get them from the field. Okay, so Megan, we have a question about what if you have two species in the same photo?
So that's where the, go back to the mammals. That one question about how many, or if there's other species present, there's no way to document what other species, but if you know it, I guess we could use the top function if you want to submit your main species, and if there's something really cool, like there's a deer and a coyote or something, you can press the done and talk and submit that other species. But a lot of these, as I've gone through, I've duplicated them. So there's one photo for the deer and see one photo for the coyote. So we will record it. That makes sense.
Perfect. And then on that note, what is the max number? What is the number of IDs for a species or a subject, a photo, before it moves to the completed tally?
For the, right now for the mammals, it's set at 5. 5 people look at it, and for the birds, it's set at 10. We might change that based on how quickly people move through and then the confidence level, but it's definitely a handful.
Yes, and I'm sorry, okay, I'm getting clarification. So the numbers on the photos at the bottom, that, so it's a question about the numbers at the bottom. So I can just answer this, but this is from, so these photos are taken by our wildlife cameras, and that's information on how we've programmed the camera. So the F is, so that's supposed to be temperature, but these cameras are actually known for not being very accurate on temperature. And then on this one, I think it's 1005, that middle number, that's just the number, the identifying number of the camera, because we have, you know, almost 60 cameras out in the field. So that's stuff that we use in the date and time.
That's a good question, though.
Yes.
Yeah, and don't look at the temperature. Sometimes you'd be shocked. That's probably not accurate. If you have any more questions or anything else you'd like to see? I guess one thing I want to point out is on our website, under the What We Do in Conserving Wildlife, there is a tab that was in the link above that has the links to both projects as well as some helpful resource guides. We'll be adding more as we find them. And a summary of my tips I was talking about earlier in the presentation. So this is kind of a landing page for you guys.
Great. And we have a question about, are we using any of the environmental data from the photos?
I think that'd be something really cool. I think we are taking vegetation analysis as they go out and check the cameras. But as I've been going through all the blanks and the wildlife photos, I have seen like just the phenology change and the oak leaves drop their leaf and grow them back. So that could be a really cool project for someone to work on. But it's just not our focus right now.
Thank you.
You definitely can see all the big monsoon storms come across the open grasslands, which is really neat.
Okay, great. Well, I think that about wraps it up. So I might go ahead and we can end this screen sharing. For those of people who might have specific questions, feel free to stay on, and we can talk further. If you want to pull up the Zooniverse and make your login, we can do that. But this will be the official end of our coffee break. So thank you all for coming and participating. We're really excited to have you on these two projects, and yeah, at least get you kind of out in the field virtually. So thank you so much, and feel free to sign off or stay on if you do have some more questions.